Okay, I was actually checking YouTube for decent videos on emergency fire starting tools, and I was actually surprised that I found an enormous amount of unhelpful information, and the only helpful guy was a ex-Marine, and he actually gave you some real good information. But even that was kind of lacking, and of course he was only issued one thing. I don't think he'd actually tested that much stuff. So anytime I actually see a need for a video and there's not already 1,000 videos like it, and I couldn't find an actual serious video on emergency fire starting tools, and of course if anybody goes out camping and decent weather, fair weather conditions, obviously they're going to bring a stove and some isobutane and of course some regular matches to light the stove. But I thought about, what about emergency fire starting devices? And if you actually go to a camping store, an outdoor store, and I used to do a lot of backpacking. I know I'm completely out of shape right now, but I used to do a lot of backpacking. I even backpacked to the bottom of the Grand Canyon, and that nearly killed my calves. And I've always given a lot of consideration, including my eccentric buddy who tests out a lot of devices as far as emergency fire starting tools. And there's a lot of, when you go to a camping store, a lot of cheap plastic junk that will break if you look at it sideways, and you know exactly what I'm talking about. But what about a partless, completely reliable, not going to break, you can't do it wrong sort of emergency fire starting tools? What is it that special forces are issued? What is it that's easy, and what is it that I would recommend? Giving everything that's out there. Also a really great DIY for emergency fire starting, something for backpacking. And we have to look at, of course, three things. We have to look at adverse weather conditions where there's, a really hard time getting anything to catch light. And unless it's been raining for a very long time and everything is completely soaked 99% of the time, you will find some dry kindling somewhere, usually at the base of a tree, to get your fire started. And of course, we have to look at two things other than the weather conditions as far as whether it's the appropriate kindling to get your fire started. That's assuming you didn't bring, for example, a can of isobutane, in an MSR stove, for example. But you want to set fire to what you actually have available, because not everybody is going to bring an isobutane canister and stove, and of course it adds extra weight. And if all favorable conditions are present, if at all possible under emergency circumstances, that's not what you're going to actually have available. So what about infallible, best option, emergency, never going to break, you can't do it wrong unless you don't know how to use the tool, fire starting tools that can't break? Once we actually have established that we have the kindling, we have to have, number one, an ignition source. But is the wood dry? Do we only need an ignition source once we actually have the kindling? Or do we actually need something in addition to the ignition source, which is the kindling that you bring with you? In which case, if the weather is bad and it's been raining for many, many days, and of course there's nothing available to light, what is it that you would bring with you that doesn't weigh anything as far as kindling to get the damp wood or whatever sort of material you're going to burn? Assume it's going to be some sticks, a heap of sticks to get it started. And of course there are countless videos on YouTube like that. What we need to look at first is ferrocerium rods, and these are on magnesium tools, for example. And of course you can get these $5 all day long on eBay. These are actually blocks of magnesium, and there's a tiny ferrocerium rod on the side to actually set off the magnesium. What you actually have to do, I've owned like a dozen of these things, is nearly impossible. And these used to be Army issue. I think in some militaries these are still issued as emergency fire starting tools. You take your knife, you actually scrape off the magnesium into little tiny splinters. You set up a little tiny pile with your kindling to the side or slightly over top of it, and then you use your ferrocerium rod on the top, which is a tiny one. This is a large one. This is actually a 1/2-inch ferrocerium rod, which you should actually get on eBay, and it'll last forever. You take your magnesium in a little pile, and you strike your ferrocerium rod here with either your knife or this steel plate. And these are great, and a lot of people actually have these in their backpack, and you could start, depends on how much magnesium you scrape off, 50, 60 fires with this. So for $5 or $6, these are wonderful. The ferrocerium rod's right here, and the magnesium block is here. Everybody should actually own one of those. Sometimes the ferrocerium blocks, or the magnesium blocks, excuse me, come with, if you don't bring a knife, a actual steel bar for actually striking your ferrocerium. This is where, and everybody will actually agree on this, the larger the ferrocerium rod, the more useful it is. Bigger is absolutely better when it comes to ferrocerium rods. You can actually get these on eBay. You just type in huge ferrocerium or half-inch ferrocerium rod, and most of them actually come with a steel striker. I've actually had this one for years and years. I've used it about a dozen times because they're actually, this is like the everlasting, remember the Willy Wonka movie, the everlasting gobstopper. One person only ever needs one. It will last forever. A large ferrocerium rod is almost exactly like this, and they're absolutely incredible. Let me give you an example and move the magnesium off of the way here. I'm actually burning holes. It burns so hot, I'm actually burning holes in the aluminum here. These are incredible. Everybody should own one of these. They're one of the most amazing. You can't break it. Well, you technically could. There's nothing to fail on it. It doesn't matter if the weather is wet. It doesn't matter what's going on. If you have any kindling that's even halfway dry, this will get it started. You might actually have to strike this 4 or 5 times, but you can always find, like I said, unless it's been raining, for a bunch of days, you could find stuff to ignite your kindling with this. Everybody should buy a half-inch ferrocerium rod. These are actually composed out of roughly 40% cerium, depends on who makes them, 40% cerium, 20% iron, about 6% or so of magnesium. This is what these are. These are magnesium blocks. And the rest is neodymium and some other metals. Everybody has their own formulation for ferrocerium. Okay. Here, these are called wet fires. You could actually get these on sometimes at camping stores like Cabela's or Bass Pro Shops. These are called wet fires. These are, for a fact, issued to special forces. These are issued to Navy SEALs and other special forces around the world. Some people actually manufacture their own in different countries, but this is wet fire. This is, if you're in the United States or Canada or Australia, you would get, and they come in little packages like this, like of gum. I'll show you what they look like. Let me take it out here. It looks like a little chalk block, except it's really soft. And what you do is you take your knife, and it's very, very easy to cut, and you actually shave off little slivers of it, and then you use your ferrocerium rod to ignite it. It only takes one strike to ignite some wet fire, and this is actually issued, I don't know how many they give, maybe 3 or 4 to special forces. These will ignite on one strike, and they'll burn for a couple, 3 minutes, depending on the surface area, how much you've actually shaved off of it. It will also ignite with 1 or 2 strikes with the ferrocerium rod, just the block alone, without shaving it. And then this will let you actually take your tinder and then lay on top of it, and of course it'll burn for a couple minutes to dry it out. And once your tinder is burning good, then you can actually set your wood or your sticks specifically on top of that. The next thing over here, since we're actually completely dismissing matches as nearly so useless, these are called UCO matches, and I've actually made a prior video, and these are extremely cool. This is a regular match next to an UCO match. These cannot be blown out by wind. If you, once you've lit it, you dunk it completely in the water and even leave it there and pull it out, it will reignite. These cannot be put out. They'll burn for about 15 to 20 seconds, and these are amazing little suckers. So, as an ignition source, obviously, you have to take into consideration the fact that whether the kindling be wet or dry, you have endless amounts of ignition here, and no one's going to bring a large box of UCO matches like this. What at most they would bring for emergency is this UCO canister, which is waterproof, but who cares if it's waterproof, because the matches will still ignite once they're wet. And it actually comes with a spare striker inside. Let me turn up my lighting here a little bit. A spare striker inside, and you get a dozen matches. This is a little waterproof container of the full-length UCO matches. And so these are giant matches. There we go. Let's set that off to the side. So remember wet fire. So there's your wet fire block right there. And the DIY is you take yourself some aluminum foil. Okay, you take yourself a vat of Vaseline, which I don't have here, but I think you know what a tub of Vaseline looks like. And then you take some cotton balls and some aluminum foil. So this is what you need. You need a little piece of aluminum foil, a bunch of little pieces of aluminum foil, some cotton balls, and some Vaseline. What you do is you take the cotton balls, wherever mine went to, your cotton balls, and you dip it in and out of the Vaseline to completely saturate the cotton balls with Vaseline. And these act as hot burning. What would the comparison be once you light it with, and it'll take usually 1 or 2 strikes to light them with your ferrocerium igniter, 1 or 2 strikes. But once they light, they burn like a hot candle for roughly 1 to 2 minutes. And this is a DIY, basically free, essentially free. I mean, once you got a bag of cotton balls and some aluminum foil, once you saturate them with Vaseline, you put them in the aluminum foil and you fold them up tight to make them completely waterproof. And then you have a little package in your backpack or your emergency kit or your roadside kit, whatever the case may be, of these ignition sources. And they are just Vaseline-soaked cotton balls wrapped in aluminum foil. The only reason, like I said, they're wrapped in aluminum foil is to keep out humidity and dampness, say you're hiking or trekking through the woods. But that's it. Here's what special forces are issued. These are wet fires, and here you actually have a ferrocerium rod, which is really one of the coolest things ever. And you get a large one. You want a large ferrocerium. If you go to a camping store, an outdoor store, what you'll find is actually ferrocerium rod that's a 1/4 inch thick, and they're usually about this long, about 2 inches long, and about a 1/4 inch thick. But go on eBay. Very few people. I don't know who actually sells the ferrocerium rods at 1/2 inch thickness. But you always get one of these. These are indispensable, will basically last forever, and incredibly, incredibly useful. But if we were to bring 3 things out into the field for emergency fire starting under any adverse weather conditions, it would be a ferrocerium rod. And of course, the magnesium burns really hot. Actually, as you can see, I actually burned through the aluminum here with the ferrocerium rod. But the magnesium burns really, really hot. You just shave the magnesium shavings off with a knife. You strike the tiny little ferrocerium rod over here on the other side. Usually takes 3 to 4 strikes to get the magnesium lit. And then it'll burn really hot, but for not very long. But if you have halfway decent dry tinder, it'll be more than long enough. These are the packages. They come in strips connected of wet fire. Should be extremely easy to find. It's kind of sold everywhere. Wet fire. There are actually alternatives made that are kind of like this. I think Coleman makes a larger nugget like this. It's basically the same thing. For cheaper, that you could get at like Lowe's or Home Depot, and they're used for igniting like your charcoal fire. You throw in one of these Coleman nuggets. I think Coleman makes them, into your charcoal fire, and it will burn for a few minutes to get your charcoal lit. But there you go. So the reason I made this video is because I actually found that there were no other videos on YouTube that really got down to the nitty-gritty. So you actually have 3 circumstances to consider based upon kindling and weather conditions. Obviously, weather conditions, number 1. Number 2, appropriate ignition source, whether that be magnesium blocks, ferrocerium rods, which are the best. These are the fail-safe, bulletproof, can't fail, can't break, lasts forever, shut the hell up and buy it device, and make sure you get a large one, because the larger the ferrocerium rods, the better. These throw out a lot of sparks and a lot of heat. It burned right through the aluminum. I don't know if you can see this, but there are big holes in the aluminum here. And also to make your own kindling out of Vaseline-soaked cotton balls. And at the very least, get yourself some large UCO stormproof matches, and that's what they call them, for obvious reasons. Like I said, you can soak it, throw it under water, as I made in a prior video. These are called Titan stormproof matches. And thank you so much for watching. I kind of make different eclectic videos. Like I said, I used to do a lot of backpacking. I don't do it anymore. I like to get back into backpacking. I've done a lot of backpacking. I used to give a lot of consideration to like hardcore backpacking gear. Obviously, I haven't done that anytime soon, but just because I'm fat and I've been buried behind the computer for these many countless years doesn't mean I don't know what I'm talking about when it comes to emergency fire starting devices. Because I do, given a lot of considerations. So those 3 considerations, remember: weather, ignition source, and kindling. Usually, like I said, if the bad weather exists, then you have to bring an ignition source with kindling, and this is kindling option number 2, your homemade cotton balls, and kindling option number 1, same as used by special forces, or these wet fires. Thank you so much for watching. Hope you liked the video. Have a nice day. Bye.